So, you clicked on this video because you experience some form of guilt, some form of not being able to fully relax, knowing what's going on in today's world. And I just want to tell you that that is absolutely normal and that is incredibly human of you. It is some kind of guilt or maybe dread that just lingers and doesn't seem to go away. Before we get into the video, I really want to lay out a foundation for us to actually get deeper into what is actually happening here. And in order for us to really do that, what I would like for you to pay attention to is your impatience throughout this video. And this is not going to be a quick and easy solution to this feeling, because there is a very deep root to this feeling that we will get into together. This is for people who either have or want to lengthen their attention span, because in today's day and age, truly what we are struggling with is the inability to get deeper and to sit with what it truly is that's happening, not only for ourselves, but for all of us. In order to solve that, I need you to be here with me and present. So now that the folks that have many other things to do have hopped off this video, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Gayatri, and I have created this project called Bodhisattvism, and I'll talk about what the Bodhisattva word means later on in this video. But truly the intention of this project is to support change makers and progressives and activists to get more resilient with our psycho-spiritual health. What I tend to call mental health is how most people understand it, so that we can continue our purpose to apply ourselves and really improve collective well-being. I have the privilege today of being able to start this series in Salmon Creek Farm. In this moment, I am in the cedar cabin, and I am in the redwood forests of Northern California, which you can see behind me. So it is incredibly beautiful, and I come from the lens with this project of eco-psychology. So really today I hope that I can speak through Mother Nature's words and represent her, them today. I also have a master's degree in yoga studies and a transformational coaching certification from the Sattva Institute. So really what this project looks like in the day-to-day over the past couple years has been yoga climate cafes, which are gatherings where people, mostly in Los Angeles, come together and talk about our political and environmental emotions. And now I really want this knowledge to be accessible to people anywhere that we are, as long as we have the internet. So today we are going to look at guilt. And in particular, this is the guilt that I think can come up when we are trying to relax, when we are trying to take care of ourselves. My practice here and this work with Bodhisattvism is informed by my own activism as well. At this moment, I am engaged with the Sierra Student Coalition, Sunrise LA, Sierra Club Angeles chapter, and starting to get involved with Los Angeles Climate Week as well. So that sort of hopefully lays a foundation for this video for you to be able to trust that I am going to hold you in this space as we journey deeper together. So what actually is guilt? Let's define that first, right? Guilt is usually a positive emotion when it comes to smaller contexts. This emotion brings to our awareness the fact that we feel bad about doing something and hurting someone else, whether that is a a human or a non-human animal or the environment. So it really is a relational emotion, right? And this can help us to better our wrongs or fix our wrongs, as well as provide apologies that actually stick and land. And this is how guilt can be positive. However, guilt can also be a self-destructive emotion when it lasts too long and when there isn't a way to truly resolve it. So this is what continues to come to our face when we're trying to relax after our activism or after our day, or even just taking a break away from social service work. I think guilt in this context can also be useful for highlighting leaders and decision makers' wrongs. And sometimes you'll see, especially in protests, like for example, what comes to my mind in this moment are during the Palestine encampments, when decision makers around universities and colleges around the United States were not taking ethical decisions to back out their money from investing in a genocidal state or the research towards genocide. Many protesters would call out to those decision makers to say, you know, you should feel guilty for what's happening. And in this way, it could be a generative emotion within the collective for people to fix their wrongs and provide appropriate apologies. And of course, apologies are not just through the words we say, right? They are also through the actions that we are willing to change. So I think change makers and progressives will likely be familiar with that sort of guilt when it comes to the collective. During the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement around 2020, I think there was also this idea of white guilt, an emotion that lingers. And this is something I'm going to get into later as well, where it can sometimes just become really self-centered. For those that are already supporting change in the world, whether it's the littlest thing, whether it's you repairing your clothing when it gets damaged, all the way up to being a UN representative for changing policies around global climate change action. When we know that we are doing something and guilt lingers for us, it's not necessarily the most useful thing, and this is why I understand you're here. I don't want to get too quickly into the solutions because I think it really helps first to understand what's going on. And that's why we're spending a lot of time around that right now. So that's why I want to ask first, like, what is it that we do when we often feel this much guilt? When we feel like what we're doing is not enough and almost may never be enough. Today, I really want to investigate what self-care means as well for this. It's incredibly important. One of the things that I really took home with me from my graduate studies in yoga was this idea of neoliberalism and neoliberal yoga, which is why I feel usually averse to yoga studios. But we need to care for ourselves, right? It's incredibly important. And what it originally has meant is healing, access to our own healing energy. We can feel guilty often when we are taking too much of that energy towards ourselves. But neoliberalism comes in, and that is a very big word, but essentially what you can understand that as is, this idea of focusing all our energy toward ourselves and individualism. And it's important to understand that we deserve our healing energy as well. It's not that we deserve it first or second, we deserve it equally. And it's about balancing these two. So second, what I mean by secondly is we all have a true nature within ourselves, which is loving and playful and joyful naturally, and it is healing. And this is the Buddha nature in Buddhism. So when it comes to service and activism and compassion, we often want to give it to others when we are in crises. And that makes sense, and we need that, and that's how we have survived, right? But when we're constantly aware of the fact that our healing power, yes, it went into something, but it didn't result in the end of that suffering. It can come back to keep looping and harming ourselves with this guilt that we feel. So, for example, I want to tell you a story of my own guilt recently. In January 2025, there were intense fires in LA, and I was on my phone for 10, 11 hours just trying to pay attention to what was happening, connecting the dots, trying to see if I was in danger. And I was around community physically in my home that were also aware. And we all experienced different emotions around it, but one of the things I really got to feel then was this anxiety that I was not doing enough, and because of that, the fires were not going away. As somebody that identifies maybe as a climate activist, I was so aware of the reasons behind these fires, and yet I could not do anything immediately about them other than engaging in mutual aid and speaking about them as much as I could, providing resources for people to mental health. I knew that this was caused by climate change. I knew that political leaders had not done enough to set up a situation where we were fire safe in those areas of LA. 2 big areas. Ultimately, this guilt of mine that I was not doing enough led to anxiety, and I was having nightmares, and I was not able to sleep properly, and just during the day, like being on my phone so much and just feeling like I'm moving so quickly and my thoughts are moving so quickly. That anxiety turned to burnout. And with that burnout, I think it's actually been a couple months since then since I've been able to actually get back on my feet. Of course, I've continued my activism with organizations, but really this burnout led to an existential thought of what is it that I'm really here to do? And I know that is what I'm doing in this moment, where I am filming the mental health education that I really want to put out into the world, and I have been wanting to for so long. However, if I were not to transmute this burnout, alchemize it, transform it into this as what I'm doing right now, it would have turned into inaction, and that's often what happens. Our guilt turns into anxiety, turns into overworking ourselves, or second guessing, and burning out. And then the burnout is not useful, right? Not that it's all about being useful all the time, but that's exactly what our guilt points to. That I need to be useful all the time as an activist, as a change maker, as somebody that just wants to see a better world. We can't be inert. In many ways, guilt makes us inert. So what is it that mindfulness teachers teach, right? My basis as a yoga mindfulness teacher is to come from the Buddhist school of yoga philosophy. So that is the core of Bodhisattvism. And I pull from other yoga philosophies as well, such as Hinduism or the Vedas, as well as Jainism. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But in mindfulness, we need to sit with our discomfort. Guilt is discomfort. It is a pain that we often avoid. And our avoidance can look like self-care sometimes, which is the problem with that. How can our self-care actually be generative to turn our guilt into a transformation where we feel like we're doing enough? Because it leads to us feeling like we're not. In mindfulness, we are taught to pay attention to our body and our mind. And these two are not separate in yoga philosophy. They're actually very much connected. And this leads me into one of the yoga scholars that I referenced in my graduate thesis, which was Chloe Diamond Leno. Oh, that was beautiful. They talk about the theory in the flesh, and they teach to queer trans people. And being queer myself and having tons of people in my community who are also queer and trans, I know that we are often really sensitive people. So Chloe Diamond Leno, she in her yoga classes doesn't just teach within the studio itself, which usually in many yoga studios is just focused on what's happening inside that studio. She acknowledges what's happening within the world and validates people's emotions and encourages folks who come to learn with her to not push beyond their limits. Yes, meet them. Yes, understand them. But to truly acknowledge and notice what happens inside our body in that present moment. And theory in the flesh is applying these intellectual things that we're getting into today, the philosophy, into our body and the way that we move day to day. The flesh part in particular, I'd like you to hone in on as well with me. So if you think about a tree or a deer that may prance through the forest, or a plant, and ourselves as humans, we are all flesh bodies. And we have senses that pick up various input, various sensations from the outside world. We experience them in this present moment. In yoga philosophy, the mind is not separate from the body because the mind is helping us to survive. It remembers things from the past and it generates stories about the future. However, we are experiencing both of those things in the present as well. And that's where we can apply our theory in the flesh. Because like any plant, animal, our body in this moment, just as Mother Nature has created, is experiencing sensations in this very moment. Our anxiety about what's happening overseas, our anxiety about what may be happening in our community. We experience that in this moment. So Chloe Diamond Leno, and like many effective yoga mindfulness teachers, points to the discomfort behind guilt. They encourage their students to sit with that discomfort of the present world's violence and become curious about what's underneath. Often in our psyche, there are deeper emotions, and then there are others that are hiding them, are shadowing them, maybe like a little curtain. Guilt is one of those curtain emotions. What is below guilt if we were to sit with it, if we were not to avoid it? There's lots of different actions we do for avoidance, even like me. It took so long for me to just record this very video. And I must say, I've been able to really get to know all my various avoidance behaviors as well. We all have them. Below this curtain of guilt, truly, is anger and fear. Fear that we're not doing enough. Anger about needing to do so much just to survive. And that is because our identity is not just about ourselves. Look at me, I'm fine here right now, right? But as progressives, as activists, as bodhisattvas, we understand that our present body is interconnected with everything around us. So of course we feel that in the present moment. Of course we feel guilt when we are extremely aware of what's happening. And if we sit with that discomfort, we get to these core emotions of fear and anger. I also don't want you to take what I'm saying as truth. I would like you to reflect on your story as well with guilt. What have you felt recently around that? And if you were to become curious about it, what is truly at the core? So these are not prescriptions, but just suggestions and things to contemplate. Because what I believe is that survivor's guilt, of course, is very natural. A reflection of our interconnectedness. Often survivor's guilt is focused on veterans of war. This is what a lot of progressive scholars have as their critique of that book, The Body Keeps the Score. Yet we experience survivor's guilt after living and witnessing through climate catastrophes, being citizens of the world, seeing what goes on, what our very country, the United States, is doing overseas, engaging in, investing in genocides, suffering, poverty. It is incredibly natural to feel survivor's guilt. And to transform it requires us to validate ourselves and not push away these emotions. Sit with them, acknowledge their discomfort. Of course you're uncomfortable. Of course you're afraid for our survival. Now that that's been said, I want to come back to this idea that I brought up earlier around white guilt. In anti-racism, white guilt is this idea that white people, and I would argue also people of upper castes and upper classes, so upper class as in billionaires, even millionaires, especially billionaires. Upper caste as in Brahmins, Kshatris, have a preoccupation with themselves when they start to learn about atrocities. White guilt centers whiteness or privilege. And it wants to soothe that guilt by going to yoga studios, by going to a therapist and healing their individual guilt and their individual discomfort. And this is how guilt is actually an emotion that doesn't serve the collective. So although it is real and requires validation, there is more to it that we can transmute. Transmute means to alchemize, to change, transform, become into a different form. Again, that comes back to this idea that guilt is a cover. And at the core, there is this fear for all of us. A very sacred, ancestral, primal fear that I am not okay because others are not okay. And now we move into the area of salves or solutions. This is sort of ongoing, right? Because atrocities are going to continue to happen. But there are 3 principles that we can apply to our guilt in order to feel that I am not afraid and feel that I deserve my own healing power too. Not first, not second, but that I deserve it too, equally as much as me giving it to others. So I will just mention them quickly to lay the foundation of these potential tools that you can take with you. The first is karma phala from the Bhagavad Gita. The second is dedicating the merits of our spiritual work to all sentient beings from Buddhism. And the third is Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown. So the first one is something that really stays with me and I think is really relevant to activists. Karma is the idea of action. I'm not going to go into decolonizing the idea of karma because there's a pop culture definition of it as well that's separate. Karma just means action in yoga philosophy. Phala or phal means fruit. So karma phala are the fruits of our actions. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna teaches Arjuna that we actually don't have the right to the fruits of our labor. So for example, if I were to plant a tree, I have a seed here. I plant that tree and I put all of the labor into it. It might take my entire lifetime and more for it to actually create fruits, depending on the tree, right? And this is just a metaphor. But the fruits of that tree is not the reason that I am planting this tree. In Turtle Island philosophy, there is this idea of 7 generations, and that we do our work today for 7 generations ahead, and we think about the great grandchildren of ours. This is a very similar idea. And this happens because we are able to trust that our work is producing fruit in the first place. So if you believe in Krishna, you simply would trust that Krishna is supporting your work and supporting you at the same time by providing you resources like money, community support, food, in order to do the work that Krishna has dedicated for you to do in the world. We can also just use the word universe for Krishna if that's not something that has resonated before for you. So that looks like I trust that my activism is creating an impact. And I don't need to be attached to that impact. Of course, there are nuances to this idea. It's important to look at analytics and impact reports. But becoming too obsessed with our impact is also burdensome. And that's where our guilt can come from and our anxiety, that I'm not doing enough. So in that way, we start to harm ourselves. Even if we might be doing impact, I would actually argue that impact isn't serving anyone because it comes from a place of guilt and anxiety. So when I trust that my work is supporting others, I can let go. The second one, the idea of dedicating our merits to all sentient beings, essentially is what I love about the Bodhisattva philosophy from Buddhism. A Bodhisattva is a being that practices their spiritual practices, including activism, including meditation, including rituals, including community care. All these things are spiritual. In order to liberate all sentient beings. For example, if I were to meditate, this is often when it comes up in texts, and I'm going to just create a visual metaphor here. When we meditate, we become aware of the discomfort of our body. going back to the theory in the flesh. And that is because of all of these tangles and knots from our past that our brain just tangles up us into. And as we meditate, we sit there and we unravel that tangled up thread or yarn. And as we do that, there's this golden ball of beauty that feels amazing to start to get to after a while. It is not ours to claim. I think it is important to feel good about our meditation practice and to understand that we do it for that good feeling. And in order to change our behaviors and understand our hypocrisy, and those tangles are really our conditioning. So unlearning in that way. And that golden ball of energy is dedicated to all sentient beings. So in that way, it's similar to that first idea of karma phala because we can let go. We are not like hoarding our spiritual results. We can actually let go and allow it to be something that is not just for me, not just for others, but us all. And that's a bit abstract. So I think what really grounds it for me is Adrienne Marie Brown's pleasure activism, one of my favorite concepts, where she advocates for us to understand that our activism is working when we feel good. Don't we want to live in a world where people feel good? Not just have our basic needs met, but to be able to feel pleasurable. Sometimes there might be a bit of sex positivity that may be required for that idea to fully land. And I am of the belief that following a yogic path and being able to experience pleasure are not at odds, because they can both be true. But I really, really think it's beautiful to think about our activism as creating pleasure for us all. For example, I'm here at Salmon Creek Farm, and it's sort of a really beautiful retreat for me, a place that has allowed me to start this video series, which I've been wanting to do for so long. And it feels incredibly good. And I'm not on my phone, and I don't fully know what's going on in the world. I know some things. But I'm able to let go because I trust that what I do does work and is making impact. And then I can allow myself to feel pleasure, to come here and rest and enjoy the beauty of the forest, to spend time with new friends, and take hikes, breathe in fresh air. All of these things are so pleasurable. And I would love for all folks to experience this. That's one of my favorite things about eco-psychology as well, where when ecosystems are balanced, we feel so good in them. It feels so good to be around diversity. And that is what it means to understand that our actions have an impact on all beings. So this is the idea of dedicating our merits to all from Buddhism. I know that my actions are going towards something important and impactful. And because I trust that, I know that I also can have the time to feel pleasure for myself as well. And I want that to be the world that we all live in. Pleasure, not that is avoidant, the way people buy technology and, try to fill their empty hole by supporting big tech companies that are destroying other countries like the Congo and their mining of lithium, for example. But pleasure coming out into nature and having access to its beauty and the diversity of healthy ecosystems. and being able to hike around, eat healthy plant-based food, spend time with friends new and old. You know, these are all really pleasurable activities, and I want the world to feel that way. So this is the idea of pleasure activism, where the way it connects to guilt is that we can also let go when we know our actions are good, because we understand that we feel good by doing good. There's also this book called Pleasurable Kingdom. It is written by Jonathan Balcombe. The subtitle is Animals and the Nature of Feeling Good. That's what it looks like. It has pigs like cuddling their faces on it. And I picked this up at the library a few weeks ago because I love the idea of pleasure activism. So I would recommend this to you as well, because I've been able to get a non-human perspective of that as well, where there's so many animals and other species, not just animals that this book talks about, that have their entire lifetimes to explore and play and feel good with one another and other species as well. And I think this can really help us to decenter our own humanness and our guilt when thinking about our role in the world. So I hope these 3 ideas land with you, and you know, these are really intimate things, and I am grateful that you're here with me unpacking your own guilt. I would like to invite you to join my little intimate community. For those of you who have really landed on this page and resonated with this work of Bodhisattvism, I would like to extend my invitation to you to join my Patreon page, which is just $10 a month. And through that, you can have access to our little Signal chat community, where we weekly engage in guided meditation together and community mental health check-ins, where we just share about how our week went and the things that we're contemplating, and we engage in these principles together. That's why Sangha is one of the 3 jewels, the 3 core pillars of Buddhist practice. And I invite you to join the Bodhisattvism Sangha. I will link the Patreon in the description. I also share tips from liberation psychology, eco-psychology, yoga, mindfulness every couple days in that group chat. And people come to that group chat to have some of their questions answered and to really talk about what's on their heart. And this helps us stay resilient through a changing world. So thank you to my Patreon subscribers. I will roll them here on the side. And thank you for joining me today.